The hum of the dryer filled the laundry room, steady and low, a sound I had long associated with the rhythm of ordinary life. My hands moved almost without thought, folding a stack of towels still warm from the heat. Steam rose in soft curls, brushing against my face, and for a brief moment, everything felt routine, safe, unremarkable. Then I heard it words that cut through the quiet like glass shattering on tile. I wasn't meant to hear them. The door to the hallway had been left slightly ajar, just enough for voices to slip through. My son's voice so familiar, so much a part of me spoke low, but the meaning struck hard. He wished I were gone, dead. That Christmas would be better without me. The towel in my hands grew unbearably heavy. My fingers trembled, and the soft fabric might as well have been stone. I froze there in the heat of the laundry room, waiting for some sign that it was a joke, that laughter would follow, that he didn't mean it. But there was only silence, a silence thicker and sharper than the words themselves. My chest ached as if all the air had been pulled out of the room. I tried to swallow, but nothing eased the tightness in my throat. My knees weakened beneath me, yet I forced myself to stand, to keep folding, to hold on to some fragment of composure. Inside, though, I was unraveling. How does a mother process the moment when her own child wishes her gone? I thought of the years I had carried him through labor, through scraped knees, through heartbreak, through every storm life had thrown his way. I thought of the nights I stayed awake so he could sleep soundly, the choices I made so he could build his life. And now, all of that seemed to dissolve into this hollow echo I was no longer wanted. The hum of the dryer kept going, cruelly steady, as if mocking the rupture inside me. I pressed the towel hard against my chest, trying to ground myself. The sting of betrayal settled like ice in my veins. My son, my only child, had wished me away as though my death were a gift. That night would not leave me. It would follow me into every corner of the house, into every quiet pause, into every memory I had held dear. And as I carried that weight upstairs, into the small in-law suite where I was allowed to stay, one question pulsed through me, louder than the silence after everything I had given. How had I ended up here? It was in that question, raw and aching, that the past began to rise again, the years of sacrifice, the choices I made for him, the love I thought was enough, and that, perhaps, is where the truth truly begins. When I look back over the years, it sometimes feels like my life became a series of quiet goodbyes to my own dreams, traded piece by piece for the sake of my son's future. After my husband passed, the house we built together became my sanctuary. Every corner carried his touch, the wooden banister he polished until it gleamed, the garden he planted with roses, the kitchen where we laughed over late-night snacks. That house was more than walls. It was the story of us. And yet, when Daniel and his wife longed for a bigger place to raise their children, I let it go. I sold the home Richard and I had poured ourselves into and handed over $12,000 of the equity. I told myself it was an investment in family, that seeing my son thrive would bring me joy enough to fill the empty spaces. But when I watched them move into that new house, boxes stacked high with their hopes, I felt like a visitor, not a partner. My name wasn't etched into those walls the way his was in mine. There were other sacrifices too. I had dreamed once of traveling Paris in the spring, a cruise through the Caribbean. I had even bought a suitcase, tags still dangling from the handle. But when Daniel lost his job, I tucked those plans away and gave him the money I had saved. It felt natural at the time. A mother doesn't think twice when her child is in need. She simply gives, and I gave in so many small ways, too. Groceries became my quiet offering. I filled their pantry week after week, slipping items onto shelves as if I were weaving love into their meals. I covered utility bills when they ran short, often without them even asking, telling myself it was just a bridge until things smoothed out. When Rebecca needed time for herself, I became the steady pair of arms rocking babies to sleep, the soft voice telling bedtime stories in the dark. Their laughter was my reward, their tiny hands clutching mine a reminder that I still mattered. But love without gratitude wears down even the strongest spirit. Over time, I noticed the balance shifting. What I considered sacrifice began to feel like expectation. My help was no longer a gift, it was assumed. The smiles of thanks grew fewer, replaced with casual nods or silence. My room in their house was never really mine. A borrowed space with faded curtains I wasn't allowed to replace. Suitcases sat in the closet untouched. Reminders of trips never taken. I told myself this was family, that love was supposed to mean giving without counting the cost. I held tightly to that belief, even as the years passed and the weight of all I had surrendered grew heavier. And yet, deep down, I began to wonder, had my giving truly built closeness, or had it only made me invisible? Was I the foundation holding everything up, or just the silent safety net no one acknowledged until it was gone? These questions haunted me in the quiet moments, though I pushed them aside, convincing myself that one day the appreciation would come. But the night I overheard my son's words, the night he wished me gone, I realized those sacrifices had not bound us closer. They had become a burden he longed to escape. And with that realization, everything I thought I knew about love and family began to fracture. It happened so quickly, yet the memory stretched out in slow motion. I was standing in the laundry room, folding towels fresh out of the dryer, when I heard the words drift through the cracked door. My son's voice, firm, unguarded, spoke of Christmas being better if I were no longer alive. The towel slipped from my hands and landed on the floor with a dull, heavy thud. My body went rigid, as though every muscle had turned to stone. The warmth of the laundry faded, replaced by a cold that seemed to seep into my bones. I stood frozen, trying to convince myself I had misunderstood. Surely, it was a slip of the tongue, a careless phrase, something taken out of context. But then came the silence, a silence so deliberate, so unbroken, that it confirmed what I already knew he had meant it. That silence was worse than the words themselves. It pressed down on me, sharp and suffocating, leaving me gasping for air that refused to fill my lungs. I waited for laughter, for a gentle correction, for anything that might soften the blow. None came. The house remained still, except for the faint hum of the dryer and the pounding of my own heart. Inside, my thoughts began to spiral. How could the boy I once held against my chest, the child who once reached for me in the night, now wish me gone? Every memory of sacrifice rose up like a cruel reminder: the house I sold, the savings I gave, the nights I spent rocking his children to sleep. Had all of it been invisible? Had I become nothing more than a burden, tolerated rather than loved? I forced myself to move, my knees trembling beneath me, and climbed the stairs to the in-law suite. That small room had always felt temporary, a space that wasn't truly mine. But now it felt like a cell, I sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the faded curtains and the untouched suitcases still tucked away in the closet. My chest ached, but no tears came. There was only the hollow ache of rejection, an emptiness so sharp it seemed to whisper that I no longer belonged here. In that silence, one truth began to sink in. If my son could wish me away with such ease, what else might have been hidden behind closed doors? This betrayal was only the beginning, and somewhere beneath the surface, I sensed there was more yet to be uncovered. I remember sitting at the small desk in my room, the kind of desk meant for writing letters, not unraveling an entire life. A stack of old mail sat there, things I had put off opening, little envelopes I had convinced myself were unimportant. My hands hesitated before touching the top one, almost as if I already knew it held something I didn't want to face. When I finally tore it open, the mortgage company's logo glared back at me. 3 months past due. My breath caught in my throat. This was the house I had sacrificed everything to help them buy. The house Daniel had promised would always be partly mine in spirit, if not in name. And here it was, teetering on the edge of collapse. I reached for my laptop, something I rarely did anymore. My fingers felt heavy as I typed in the login to the emergency account I had once set up as a safeguard for the family. What came up on the screen made my stomach twist. Almost empty. Quiet withdrawals, week after week, until thousands had vanished. I had stopped checking years ago, trusting Daniel's word when he told me they barely touched it. Now the truth was staring me in the face. It hadn't been an emergency fund at all. It had become their allowance. I sat back in my chair, the room tilting slightly as if the ground beneath me were no longer solid. My years of savings, the money I had convinced myself was a gift of love, had been siphoned away without gratitude, without acknowledgement, without even the courtesy of asking. It wasn't sacrifice anymore. It was exploitation. Then came the voices. I heard them drifting up from the kitchen below. Low at first, then clearer. Daniel's voice, tense, admitting the account was empty. Rebecca's reply, casual, almost dismissive, suggesting they dip into what little I had left tucked away for Christmas. I could hear the pause in Daniel's tone, a hesitation, but not outrage. No defense of me. Only a weak concession, as though my money were still theirs to solve their problems. I pressed my hand against the wall, steadying myself as the bile rose in my throat. It was no longer just the whispered wish that I were gone, it was this. The numbers on the screen, the overdue notices, the quiet plotting of what more they might take. Every gift I thought I had given was nothing more than a lifeline grabbed with greedy hands. I returned to my room, the silence heavier than before. The ache in my chest deepened into something colder, harder. It was no longer just about love lost. It was about betrayal documented in ink and numbers. For the first time, I wondered if I had anything left to hold on to, any corner of power that hadn't been stripped away. That night, as I stared at the drawer where I kept old legal papers, the thought struck me, maybe I wasn't as powerless as they believed. Maybe, hidden in those dusty folders, there was something they had overlooked. I sat on the floor of my small room, the drawer pulled wide open, papers scattered like fallen leaves around me. For years, I had kept them tucked away, telling myself they were relics of a past life I no longer needed. But that night, with betrayal pressing down on me from every angle, I reached for them as if they might hold some forgotten key. The papers smelled faintly of dust. The edges curled from time. My hands shook as I flipped through old envelopes, utility bills, tax statements, letters addressed to Richard and me. Then, at the very bottom, I found it. A thick folder bound with a rubber band that had long since cracked. Inside, neatly labeled in Richard's familiar handwriting, was an envelope marked Plan B. My breath caught. I could almost hear his voice as I traced the letters with my finger. He had always been the cautious one, the man who kept copies of everything, who believed in preparing for storms I never thought would come. I slid the documents out and spread them across the floor. Deeds, notarized agreements, even a co-ownership paper with my name printed clearly beside Daniel's. The realization hit me like a rush of cold air. I still legally owned 40% of this house. Daniel had promised years ago to file papers removing me, but he never had. Whether out of neglect or arrogance, he had left me holding far more power than I had imagined. For a long moment, I just sat there, stunned. My fingers pressed against Richard's signature. Gratitude welled up in me, bittersweet and sharp. He had seen what I couldn't, and even from beyond the grave, he had left me a safeguard. I wasn't as powerless as they believed. I called the attorney who had known our family for decades. My voice trembled as I explained, but she listened with the steady patience I remembered so well. When she confirmed what the papers already told me, that my rights were intact, that my name still carried legal weight, I felt something shift inside me. Relief mingled with rising strength. For the first time in years, I could breathe without the weight of dependence crushing me. I had been drained, diminished, made to feel like a shadow in a house I helped build. But now, sitting among those papers, I realized I was not trapped. I had leverage. I had choices. And most of all, I had the strength my late husband had quietly prepared me for. That night, I gathered the documents into a neat stack and placed them on my desk. I looked at the suitcase waiting in my closet, the one I had left untouched for so long. A decision was beginning to take shape. I would no longer live as the silent backbone of a family that wished me gone. The time had come to act, to reclaim myself, and to step toward the freedom I had nearly forgotten I deserved. I began packing on Christmas Eve, not with haste or panic, but with a calmness that surprised even me. The suitcase had sat in my closet for years, untouched, its tags still dangling from dreams I never pursued. Now, every sweater I folded, every keepsake I tucked inside, felt like closing the chapter of a life I had carried too long. I chose only the essentials: clothes, my passport, Richard's old watch, and the folder of documents that had restored my strength. Downstairs, the house was unraveling. The lights flickered, then went dark. The television cut off mid-sound, the hum of the refrigerator silenced. I could hear Daniel's voice sharp with panic, Rebecca's rising with anger. The unpaid bills had finally caught up to them, and with each slam of a cabinet and frustrated stomp across the floor, I felt the chaos deepen. Yet inside my room, there was only quiet. Before zipping my suitcase, I set aside 3 small packages, wrapped in plain brown paper. Inside each, I placed a simple gift for my grandchildren and a letter written in my own hand. I told them of my love, of baking pies together, of bedtime stories whispered in the dark. I reminded them that none of this was their fault, that my leaving was not a rejection of them, but an act of self-preservation. Those letters were my final embrace, sealed not in ribbons, but in truth. At one point, Rebecca stormed into my room, her eyes sharp, her words edged with accusation. She demanded to know why everything seemed to be collapsing at once, as though I had pulled the strings that unraveled their fragile world. I stood still, my voice calm inside me, reminding myself that I had simply stopped paying for a foundation they had come to expect from me. I was no longer their safety net. That clarity was my answer, spoken not in argument, but in silence and resolve. By 4 a.m, the house was still dark and heavy with tension. I rolled my suitcase to the door, pausing just long enough to place the children's gifts beneath the tree. No glitter, no bows, only love written in words they could carry with them always. When I stepped outside, the cold air bit my cheeks, but it felt cleaner than any breath I had taken in years. Snow crunched beneath my shoes as the shuttle pulled into the driveway. Behind me, the house loomed like a hollow shell, dark and unwelcoming. Ahead of me stretched uncertainty, but also freedom. And so I walked forward, steady, unafraid. For the first time, I was no longer carrying the weight of being their foundation. I was carrying only myself. When the plane touched down hours later, I felt something I hadn't known in years: lightness. The weight I had carried, the silent ache of being unwanted, was no longer pressing against my chest. I was alone. Yes, but for the first time in decades, that aloneness felt like freedom. I walked through the streets of a city that was not mine, breathing in air that was crisp and new, and I realized I had stepped into a life that belonged only to me. Sitting in a small cafe, notebook open before me, I let the truth settle in. For so long, I believed that love meant giving until nothing was left, that being a good mother required erasing myself. But I see it now. Love without respect is not love at all. Family without gratitude is not family. No matter the blood we share, dignity matters. Boundaries matter. And sometimes the bravest act is not holding on, but letting go. To those listening, hear me when I say this: your worth is not defined by how much you give, but by how you honor yourself. If my story touched you, I ask you to share it. Leave a comment. Tell me where you are listening from. And never forget, you have the right to choose yourself.